After his Voyage of the Beagle in 1831, and almost 2 decades of musing, reflecting, worrying, and writing, Darwin wrote his major opus, On the Origin of Species. To this day, the work is still one of the most controversial pieces of science writing ever to have existed. And soon after its publication, Darwin received a lot of ridicule, as shown by this cartoon of him on the head of an ape. What did Darwin actually say in this work that earned him such scathing criticism? First, he claimed that all organisms share common descent, that is, they descended from a single common ancestor, and as they descended with modification or changes. One of the largest problems with these two ideas was that it ran against the ideas of the church that God created man and all the other species perfectly and that they were unchanging. How did Darwin argue that these two mechanisms occur? By something called survival of the fittest, also known as natural selection. Darwin argued that natural selection occurred in 4 steps. First, he argued that populations, not individuals, evolve, and that they only evolve if they exhibit variation or differences between the individuals of a species, such as these different patterns on the back of this single beetle species. He then argued that individuals would struggle to exist and would compete with each other for resources, such as these small turtles racing to get to the ocean before the predators get them. Since they are struggling to exist and they show variation, not all of those individuals will have equal potential to survive. Only the ones the most suited to their habitat will survive. So while some variants, such as these green beetles, might stick out in their environment, there might be other variants, such as these orange beetles, that don't. Once the fittest, such as the orange beetles, have survived, they may even get to reproduce, and when they do, the 4th step occurs. The traits of the fittest accumulate in the population over generations. So these beetles now share an adaptation of orange color. To shorten, variation plus competition and a struggle for existence will lead to only survival of the fittest, and then the adaptations or the traits of those fittest organisms will accumulate over generations. This 4-step process is markedly different from the theory of evolution proposed by one of Darwin's contemporaries, named Jean-Baptiste Lamarck. Lamarck argued that giraffes got their long necks over evolutionary time when an original short-necked ancestor reached for the upper leaves in the trees of its environment, driven by the inner need to feed itself. And as it reached higher, it kept stretching its neck until the neck became progressively longer. He then argued that these successfully long-necked giraffes would then mate and have babies with long necks. In more general terms, he was suggesting that organisms change their phenotype through use and disuse of organs, and thus organisms acquire advantageous traits from following their inner needs, and then lastly that organisms pass those acquired traits on to their offspring. But you know from your genetics videos that this claim is erroneous. Acquired traits are not in our genes and thus cannot be passed down. So don't be a Lamarckian. Never fall for his means of explaining evolution. Single organisms cannot adapt or evolve, and they certainly can't pass on acquired traits to their offspring. Instead, imagine a population of giraffes that have a variation in height, that are competing for the same resources. Only the fittest survive, the ones with the long necks, and after many generations of long-necked giraffes reproducing, the long neck trait starts to accumulate in the population.